Welcome to Preparing for AI with Matt Cartwright and Jimmy Rhodes, the podcast which investigates the effect of AI on jobs, one industry at a time. We dig deep into barriers to change, the coming backlash, and ideas for solutions and actions that individuals and groups can take. We're making it our mission to help you prepare for the human and social impacts of AI. Children of the Revolution, welcome back to another episode of Preparing for AI. He's Jimmy Rhodes.
And he's Matt Cartwright.
And today we are going to be looking at translation. So another guest interview this week. We've got Chris Ward with us, who is a freelance translator. I'm going to be asking him to introduce himself and say a bit about himself in a few minutes. But I think we'll start off because, as we kind of always say, it's been an interesting week in AI. And I think Jimmy has got something very specific that he's going to talk about to start the episode today.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So this week, I say this week, by the time the podcast goes out, I'm sure there'll be new news. But as we record the podcast, there's been an announcement from Google just yesterday on the 10th of March, I believe, 10th of April, sorry, where they're talking about the release of Gemini 1.5 Pro. I presume the Ultra version will be along shortly, which is a new mixture of experts model with a 1 million token context window. And also they've been talking about their Google agents. So this is the first time that we've seen one of the big tech companies basically talking about releasing a agent-based model. And to talk a little, we've talked a little bit about agents. We talked about Devin on a previous podcast, but to talk a little bit about agents, basically, if your large language models are like the development of the internet back in the day, agents are probably the dot-com boom in terms of like all the companies that came out of the internet. The spawn of agents is kind of like I say, like the equivalent of that dot-com boom, where you're going to see a lot of companies and a lot of new tech being based on these AI agents, it's effectively a more easily accessible way of using AI models and these large language models. So what you can use these agents for is actually performing real world actions, like, for example, doing a coding job, like doing an actual coding job. And that's what Devin's been designed to do. And Google have started releasing these agents now that can, interact in all sorts of ways. So they can potentially be in call centers, like answering phone calls from customers. They could be booking flights for you. They could be actually taking out actions in the real world on the internet using large language models as their kind of back end. And I touched a little bit like on Google Gemini 1.5. So for people who don't know what the context window is, effectively the context window is how long a conversation you can have with an AI before it forgets what you're talking about. And this new 1 million token context window is absolutely huge. I think previously Claude had 200,000 tokens. Before that, GPT-3 has like 4,000 tokens. With this new 1 million token context window, what Google is saying is you can upload a whole movie, you can upload books, and you can have a conversation with an AI around all of that. It's a mixture of experts model where you can feed in movies, you can feed in images, you can feed in audio, you can feed in text, and you can just have a natural language conversation with the LLM around any of that. And this context window kind of is one of the things that opens that capability up.
So, Jimmy, the agents will, because Google have said they're kind of concentrating on the enterprise market, aren't they? I mean, that's where the money is, I guess, is commercializing them. But is this where you think we see essentially your own kind of personal assistant, that can do everything for you, that can book things for you? Is this where we see something that's able to do multiple tasks, or is this about a specific agent to do each individual task?
I think so. I don't fully know, but I believe that these agents are capable of interacting with a range of different pieces of software. So, for example, one of the things you can imagine with Google, and this is why it's interesting coming from Google, because Google, you already have Gmail, you've got Google Calendars, you've got Google Maps, and people are used to using those kind of things. So what these agents are going to probably do is interact with all of that. And so you'll be able to ask an agent to send an email to actually explain, all the emails in your inbox to you. You'll be able to get them to book appointments, book transport, find places on maps for you, all that kind of stuff, all rolled up into one. That's kind of the capability that we're talking about.
And with Gemini as well, there's another piece of news that came out in the last sort of week or two is that, and this is rumors at the moment, but that Apple are potentially talking with Google about using Google's AI as, I don't know if it will necessarily be as a kind of alternative to Siri or as the basis of Siri or as an alternative tool. But, the announcements in the last few days and the fact that it feels like Google is, considering Google invented the kind of transformer model and then fell behind, it feels like this is kind of their catching up. And so for me, it would kind of make sense that if Apple are thinking of a kind of big announcement in June with the new devices that tie it with Google, it feels like now it's a more attractive idea than maybe it was, even a week ago.
Absolutely, yeah, and Apple definitely need to play catch up as well, because things like Siri and Cortana and things like that are old hat now. They look pretty incapable next to some of the large language models. So I think some of the stuff we've just been talking about possibly applies to translation as well. But at this point, I'd like to introduce our guest on the podcast this week, Chris. So, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself and talk a bit about your background as a translator?
Yeah, hi guys. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. So I studied Japanese in Sheffield between the years 2000 and 2005. I actually had a chance to live abroad for 1 year in 2003 as well, where I really tested myself out. Couldn't understand a word to begin with. It took about 6 months, and then eventually people could understand what I was saying and vice versa. Finished that, like I said, 2005. Moved to London, decided to work in property for 10 years because I didn't know what the hell I was doing with my life. And during that time, I was thinking about, well, I did a degree in Japanese, so at some point I should probably use that. I did actually use it a little bit as an agent, taking people around houses that come over from Japan as expats and whatnot. But eventually my grandfather kind of gave me some money, and so I decided to go and do an MA around 2014, 2015, at which point I finished that. So, like I say, September 2015, I finished that MA. I should also point out that I was working during that time as an in-house translator for a company called Poll to Win, doing games translation and games revision. Enjoyable though that was, I decided that freelancing was probably more my thing. I've never been a company man. My Toyota history will attest to that. Set myself up as a freelancer from about 2014, 15. So I've been doing this for about 10 years. Started off working on anime and subtitling and things like that, and eventually moved on to slightly more specialized stuff, building contracts, memorandums of understanding, family registers, and official documents like that for Japanese expats and big businesses in Japan.
Cool. So, so the translation you've done is you used to do translation for anime and games, right?
Yeah, initially, it was easier to find people who were willing to give me work in that domain, because the problem with translation, as most jobs, is they always want experience, right? So how do I get the experience without having to work? It's a chicken and egg situation. So I worked for a company that gave me a lot of different animated series to translate in the beginning, and because I'd been part of the Anime Society at Sheffield University and had a bit of a penchant, shall we say, for animation, it was quite an easy one for me to walk into. Creatively, it really did. What's the best way to put this? It was a really interesting one creatively, to work out how to turn a certain phrase, how to describe certain cultural things that are only really understandable to someone who's lived in Japan, who's got a bit of the experience of being surrounded by Japanese people. And then working out how to best express those things in a way that can be really grasped by a non-native, but also that remains faithful to the language and the culture. Something which, as we'll probably just discuss in a minute, AI is going to struggle with doing well anytime soon. It probably will eventually, but I'm sure we'll cover that in a bit.
We'll definitely cover it in a little while, but I feel like you're underselling yourself a bit in terms of your language abilities, Chris. So, like, tell us how many languages you actually speak.
So, French, Spanish, English, German, Italian, but I wouldn't say I can speak any of those fluently anymore. Mainly just Japanese and French.
Yeah, but you're fluent. You're fluent in like 3 languages, right? So you know your stuff.
Yeah.
So you were talking about. I mean, you kind of already got into some of the stuff we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But before we get onto that, I mean, well, sort of getting onto that, I guess. Like, I know it's not an AI tool, but you've probably used things like Google Translate and things like that over the years. I mean, what translation tools have you used, and where do you see that they're useful, and where do you see that they're kind of less useful, and why? Because I'm not, I only speak one language basically. I don't really, I can speak a little bit of Chinese, but I'm by no means fluent. So yeah, just sort of like welcome your views on that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I was just thinking about this actually in the run up to this discussion, and I remember when I first started studying Japanese, it was just books, massive dictionaries. I mean, I've got one here for you.
Nice.
This sort of thing. We used to go to the library and get these out, and then you needed another dictionary in order to be able to actually read what's written there. So you get one dictionary to find out what that says, and then get another dictionary to find out what that means. And now you can just type it into Google and it'll tell you immediately. So worlds apart in just 10, 15 years. And in terms of Google Translate, so even just 4 or 5 years ago when it really started taking off, maybe a little bit longer than that, I remember typing something in and it was just mu, which gives the characters mu, 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 mu in Japanese. And it spat out a completely coherent English sentence. And obviously what I typed in was complete gobbledygook. So it's come on a long way. And I think Google is doing a good job, but actually DeepL is probably where it's at the moment in terms of translation. So machine translation wise, you're looking at, especially for Japanese, it beats Google hands down. So Google, DeepL, I don't think there are really any, there are obviously others, but those are the 2 main ones at the moment that people will be using.
Yeah. And in terms of like, in terms of day to day in your job, like where do you use AI or where do you use these tools and where can you not use them? So like you're talking about DeepL there, like, can you apply that? Is it you're just translating single words or is it you're translating whole paragraphs? Like where are the limitations?
The limitations currently, there aren't really many because you can actually upload an entire document to DeepL. I actually have a professional subscription to it because these days some customers are just asking for me to what they do, what they call machine translation proof editing, so MTPE. Gone are the days now where it was just, I have to sit down with a bunch of different dictionaries or online dictionaries to have to do this. I can input an entire paragraph into DeepL so long as it's, the customer is happy for me to do that. I have to get their permission first. Things like NDA wise, for example, DeepL has an agreement with subscribed members that it won't divulge anything at all. Whereas if it's the free version, there's no such restrictions from DeepL to stop, to prevent that from happening. But you also agree to that in their user agreement at the beginning when you sign up, so you know what you're doing either way. But quite a few of my customers these days are happy for me to use DeepL because it's just that good, depending on the kind of thing that you're putting in there. Going back to your question, it could be a few words. If it's a character or a small sentence I've never seen before, then I might put it in there as a standalone, or I might look it up in a separate online dictionary. But I can just put in an entire document so long as it's legible.
So
problem.
Forgive the question, but what are they coming to you for then? If you're just putting it into DeepL and sorry, that sounds like a bit of a
exactly
harsh question.
where I was about to ask the same question.
Well, this is the point. Like at the moment, it's still necessary for me to be there. It's not perfect by any means. So DeepL is getting very, very good. But the problems that I've found with it have been mostly around it's around the punctuation. So the way that Japanese sentences are punctuated tends to cause DeepL a problem. And I've found a little bit of a workaround in that removing certain commas, rejigging a little bit the original Japanese in a way that's still, the same sense and the same meaning, will actually output a better English translation. And so there really still currently is a need for a human there to check and make sure that what's happening in the translation is accurate. You couldn't just. I've had companies send me translations that have gone through DeepL. They've done themselves, and they want to charge me a third of my normal rate. And I'm like, no, I'm going to have to rewrite this entirely.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like as opposed to coming to you and asking you to translate it, you've had customers come to you and say, "Here's a translation. Can you just basically check it?"
Yeah, that has happened. Yeah. But you do also get agencies that understand that the translators know how to use these tools better than the end client does usually, and so they would rather still be the middlemen and say to the client, "Look, this translator is going to be using MT, but he will be or she will be proofing it and making sure it's all up to snuff." But at the moment, there's not too much of a discount for that, but I can anticipate one coming in the next few years when it's almost perfect on its own.
Surely that depends. I mean, maybe that says something about the kind of client that you have, though. But it feels like we always, I think, talk about the kind of top and bottom end of markets. And, if you absolutely need something to be 100% accurate and you absolutely can't accept a mistake in it, then that kind of makes sense. But have you seen a drop off in the amount of sort of general translation where, the accuracy being 100% accurate is not so important?
I rarely. There have been cases where it's more a question of we just need to get the gist. But if you're talking about an MOU or a contract for building construction, that's going to be worth billions of yen. Then they're going to need that to be as accurate as possible. Some of the noteworthy issues with even with DeepL, good though it is, I found have been things to do with referring back to parties within a contract: party 1, party 2, party A, party B. Sometimes it gets that wrong. Now that's huge. You put party A where it's supposed to be party B, everything's null and void. Even once or twice. So that's where it becomes really critical for a keen eye to have a good scan of the document and make sure that there's no issues. And there are still issues with that.
I mean, that makes sense, but that's what I'm saying about, the difference between different markets. And maybe this is because of the nature of the people that come to you for that work. But I'm thinking, for example, I worked for a business and a Japanese CEO came over to visit me, and I want to write a thank you letter to them. And okay, that's important, but I can put that into a translation app, and if it's not 100% accurate, maybe I don't really care. So did you used to have that kind of work? Because it feels to me that's the kind of thing that would drop away. And my own experience working and having to send letters in a previous job to ministries in another language, we would get a local member of staff to do that. I could probably do a basic version myself, to be honest. But then, in the last few years, I'm talking even a couple of years ago, I would just use Google Translate and then have a look at it myself or get someone to have a look at the last part of it. So it feels like, that area of translation, surely you would see a drop off in the demand for that.
I can't really say that I've had that many jobs that sound like what you're describing. I tend to get things like family registry, visa applications, business documents, official sort of embassy documents, those sorts of things. Yeah. And so there are instances where, you know, there are certain things within those documents, like obviously dates of birth, getting the name right, for example. There's another big one for you. In Japanese, you could have 2 characters read. I don't know. You can have multiple readings for different kanji in Japanese for the names, and there's literally no way of knowing that without asking the person. And so at some point, maybe, you know, we're not discussing AI just yet, but AI may be able to recognize that this is something that it can't know without checking. And so there may be some sort of an automation within the LLM to go to the client and check with them, by the way, is this the correct reading? If not, how am I supposed to read it? But currently, I don't think it can do that. And I don't think it's going to be able to do that for a little while yet. And so, again, there's a case in point where you need a human.
I think the visa example is quite interesting because, you know, I know, for example, the UK, you know, requires any documents that are not in English to be translated into English. Now, other countries don't do that. You know, Schengen, some Schengen countries accept some documents to be in foreign languages. It would seem to me that a very, very quick fix that will come quite soon, if it's not already in place, is, you know, those documents that are needed to be translated will actually, your decision maker can use a piece of translation software, AI tools to translate that. And that's the kind of thing that will potentially go fairly quickly. I mean, it's really interesting listening to you. I'm quite surprised at some things that haven't changed already, but then listening to you, I guess also what it feels like you're saying is most of the work where people are seeking professional translators are things which, you know, these are really, really important things that can't be gotten wrong. And therefore there's going to have to be an absolute trust for probably a fairly long period of time before people agree with it. It is quite similar to the law episode where we said, you know, for the law sector, the implications of something going wrong are so huge. The same with what you're talking about, you know, $1 billion contract. I mean, I guess a lot of the translations you do are legal translations, and therefore there's a real overlap with the law industry.
Yeah, there is. I can't claim to be massively specialized. I've done a lot of contracts now, so I know how they work and how they're written. But there are people. I'm part of a network of Japanese translators called JNet, which is a group that's part of the ITI, the Institute for Translators and Interpreters. I'm actually their treasurer, believe it or not. But the people that are part of JNet have a degree in Japanese, a degree in law, and know how to read and write patents, and know biomedicine. You know, some of the people that I'm surrounded by can do all those things together. I'm not one of those people, but I understand certain aspects of my industry well enough to do okay. But for sure, you need a real firm grasp of multiple different fields and sectors, ideally within certain specific industries, to be able to do this job really well and command some of them command an extremely high salary, particularly the interpreters. And so, like you say, I don't believe that those are going to go out of. They're not going to go out the window anytime soon. It's going to take a while for the AI to really be able to be trusted to a point where we can do away with people.
It also, so to me, it also sounds more like a legal thing where. So it's a bit like with self-driving cars. A lot of I know self-driving cars still aren't a thing yet, and they've been promised every year for, you know, God knows how long. But
Tesla's
one of the problems. Yeah, exactly. But one of the problems that was always quoted with self-driving cars was kind of like the legal aspect, who's liable, who's responsible, all the rest of it. And I haven't read all of DeepL's terms and conditions, but I presume somewhere in their terms and conditions it says we're not liable if you use this for formal legal translation or something like that. So part of the human part is actually, even if you are using these tools and using these kind of like applications and AI and all the rest of it, and DeepL obviously is AI. Like I've had a look, it's an AI model in the background. but they're not going to start like until you get an AI model that's saying, yeah, we'll take full liability for if your legal translation goes wrong, which I guess is partly what you're doing, even if you're a bit of an intermediary between, these legal companies and something like DeepL, and you're using that as a tool. Even if you're using that for the majority of translation, you're on the hook, basically, as a human in the loop.
It was a great point that Jimmy made in the law episode, or he didn't actually make it, but I quoted him on it afterwards, which was that you need a person in the loop so that there's someone to blame at the end of it. And it feels like this is very similar, doesn't it? You're never, well, not never, but you're not anytime soon going to have an AI tool or translation tool, whether it's AI based or not, that says, like you say, we take responsibility for this. So you're going to have either a person in your own organization or somebody else to blame. So it feels like maybe the job is taking the responsibility.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good point. In a sense, I'm very much responsible for the work that I put out there. When there's an issue, usually the agency is the one that acts as the intermediary. If I'm working for an agency, which I typically do, legally speaking, I haven't, fortunately, touch wood, faced any such consequences, and so I couldn't really comment too much on how that would work. I hope never to have to find out. But I will say this: when I've worked without an agency in the past, it's caused me more headaches than it's been worth, because it's typically been with a direct client in Japan who, and this is a weird issue. It's not a particularly legal one, but it's interesting nonetheless. Often the CEO of the company for whom I'm doing the translation, or someone of that ranking, seems to think they know English better than I do, and will quite happily rewrite the stuff that I've typed up and go, "Doesn't this sound better?" And I just have to shrug my shoulders and go, "It sounds absolutely terrible. Sorry, I can't help you if you're gonna just rewrite everything." And there have been times where it's been very frustrating, because there's always someone in between me and this person, the CEO or the MD or whatever. But and so I do have to kind of at some point wash my hands of it and go, "Look, I've given you what I believe to be an accurate and correct rendition of your Japanese website, for example, but it is now your translation because I've given it to you. You can do what you want with it, but I can't be responsible for any backlash if you choose to amend the work that I've done."
In terms of, we've talked quite a lot about the industry you work in and some of the sort of legal industry and stuff like that. Like, how do you see it affecting other aspects of the industry? So, like, you talked about some localization work that you did in the past where you were localizing, I think it was video games and movies. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I actually, weirdly, because on your podcast and out there on YouTube, the first wave of AI seems to be taking over a lot of the creative content out there. And there's a discussion around whether it's going to hurt the music industry as well and things like that. I'm not so sure that it's going to affect the creative side of translation in the same way, because, as we spoke about on the phone the other day, actually, the creative side of things, where it's video games or whether it's animation, how is AI going to be able to hold on to any contextualized information in a way that it can refer back to it on the fly? I mean, I know there are like the LLMs at the moment are creating these huge context sort of compendiums, if you will, that it can look back to. But how is it going to look at a specific character's face within the context of a certain episode, which is maybe 13 episodes in, and know that has a specific meaning in relation to the person that they're speaking to? Do you know what I mean? How can AI get to that point where it understands all these different parts and moving parts within an anime?
Yeah. So some of our readers won't be familiar with kind of the industry and with the nuances of the translation, the localization industry. So I was just saying, like, just to dig into that a little bit more, when you're doing that kind of work, it is that nuanced where it could come down to facial expressions and micro expressions, things like that.
To some degree, I'd say so. Yeah, tangibly is the word I'm looking for. When there are certain specific words said in Japanese, it can mean a whole ream of different things. This isn't going to mean a lot to many of the people out listening here, but the word yoroshiku in Japanese could be thank you, I'm glad to meet you, or it was nice hanging out with you, or and it really does depend on what's just happened and what the relationship is between the two characters or between the group of people. And so those sorts of things are, at the moment, I can't wrap my own. I'm sure AI will be able to figure it out quicker than I can, but I can't wrap my head around how that sort of thing can be easily understood by essentially a computer and then put into the complete correct translation for someone to read. I still think you're going to need people for a long time for things like that.
My challenge on that, though, would be we're sort of basing it on the idea that a computer, or that it is a computer, and that it's not a neural network the same as a person's brain. And, if we just take AGI to mean that it is equally as intelligent as a human or slightly more intelligent, then, the sort of counter argument is, well, you might not understand how it can happen, but if you can do it, why won't the AI be able to do it? I think it's sort of the concept of what is an AI and how clever will it become? And I think we don't know. I mean, some people say we'll have AGI this year. Jan LeCun still says it's maybe 10 years away. So it depends who you listen to. And I think it's potentially all of this stuff is all of us. And I think even the people who are working in this sector, because let's remember, they don't actually really know how an LLM works completely. None of us know how it's going to work, but it feels like the rate of progress is exponential, that I don't see how it won't be able to do that at some point. It's just a matter of when, to me.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. It's obviously impossible for, well, not impossible, but it's hard for a human currently to see how that is going to unfold. Even AI hasn't unfolded to the point where it understands how that's going to unfold. So how can we mere humans conceive of that? So I suppose my point is will generative AI be able to pass images on a screen or through its neural network in order to be able to interpret the things that it needs to be able to interpret in order to output a proper subtitle?
Well, that was literally the part of the announcement from Google yesterday is a mixture of experts models that can take in video, audio, images, and then basically chuck the whole lot into a large language model, and then you can ask it questions around it. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's around the corner where localization can be just done by an AI. And actually, the more interesting stuff was around the legal ramifications with some of the translating legal documents and all the rest of it. And I think there are some areas. So if we talk about sort of several different areas of translation, my feeling from this conversation is, if you just need something translating and it doesn't really matter, it doesn't have any legal ramifications, you can already do that with Google Translate and things like DeepL, and you can just chuck it into ChatGPT right now, right? So if there were exactly. So if there were jobs doing that in the past, those jobs are already gone, right? Like pretty much, I guess. When it comes to things where there's legal ramifications and it basically needs a human to take responsibility for it, that's probably a little way off. We're probably, in fact, maybe a long way off. Maybe there'll always be a requirement to have someone who's basically taking some kind of responsibility for it, because I don't think companies like DeepL will take that responsibility, or it's unlikely. I personally think that what we've just talked about, so your kind of localization and your translation from image to text, I think that's maybe a little way off, but it'll be done at some point in the future.
I agree, and that I'm playing devil's advocate here, but I do think that you're right. It will be able to interpret things on screen, probably just analyze whatever the animators decided to make a facial feature. There may even come a time where animation is incorporated with AI to a point where that is more feasible. Do you know what I mean? So that they're animating in a way where they know that the the AI will be able to interpret these things more easily or on the fly. But actually, I was just thinking about comedy. I was thinking about things like puns and jokes. I haven't done enough research into it, but do you guys know if is AI doing jokes just yet? Because
I think Claude has a sense of
culturally
humor, doesn't he?
laden ones, how to interpret a joke from Japanese or French or Greek or Spanish or whatever, and spin that around on its head, because it just doesn't work in the native. It literally translated from the native language into the target language. How's it handling that at the moment? I've not seen any evidence to suggest it's very good at it currently, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, so it's just an interesting anecdote, but if you could get real-time translation, I think that would be really, really helpful in a specific situation my friend was in the other day when he went to see Dune 2 in the cinema, and half the movie's in Fremen, half the movie's in Harkonnen, and it was translated into Chinese. And he did. so it was quite a disappointing out into the movies. I think I'm waiting for it to come out on DVD or DVD. Do we even have DVDs anymore?
Jimmy, the head of AI, he still uses DVDs.
It's an anecdote.
Yeah,
I'll extend the anecdote on VHS. Yeah. One of the things we haven't talked about, and I won't extend this too much, but I think, and I know you don't do this for a job, but like one thing in translation is kind of simultaneous translation, which is probably, I think, safe for a little while.
I would say so. The trust issue that you touched on earlier, I think, really is do we trust robots enough to be living in our house? Do we trust them enough to be saying describing what this person's talking about accurately, certainly at a business level, and with all the legal implications that you described earlier? I think you're going to need a human there for the foreseeable future. I don't know. There's going to be a tipping point where possibly the human that's there assisting the AI translator has a checklist of some sorts, going, "Yep, that's fine. Yep, this is okay. This is okay as well." And initially, maybe it'll be something like 70, 75% or less, I don't know. And then gradually, as the years go by, you might have a checklist that's 98%, 99% accurate. And so when that point is reached, possibly, that people will just be done away with in terms of translation and interpreting. I don't really know, but it's uncertain, isn't it?
We're talking here, Jimmy, about real-time speech translation, so kind of an interpretation, right? We're talking about interpreters, because I think thought quite a bit about this, and almost as like a broken record, we say the same thing over and over again about how at the top it won't be, you'll still need people. But I think this is an example. If you're a world leader or a CEO, you're definitely not going to be able to not trust that trusted translator who's not, because in those cases it's not just someone who's doing a one-off job for you. It's someone that is almost like your PA that lives, their life with you. Same with professional sports people, professional Japanese baseball players in the US. Their translators are usually their best friend and their confidant and their manager, and so that kind of thing probably doesn't change. But there was something that that's been released, I think, in the last couple of weeks called the AI Pin. You can look this up on YouTube, which it's a kind of clip-on piece of hardware, which is probably, that's an Apple headphone case, slightly bigger than that, which clips on. And some of the comments are, okay, why would I have that when I can just use my phone? It's slightly different in that it has, specifically to use AI. And one of the examples that they give is when you land in a country, it automatically knows which country. It's got a 4G, 5G subscription. It knows which country you're in, and then it's ready to listen to people talking in another language. And the example they showed was they asked it to use Catalan. The lady using it, who was a CEO, spoke, and then, with a few seconds delay, it spoke in Catalan. And so that would absolutely solve the problem of, going on holiday or, being able to have a kind of normal interaction. It won't solve the problem of Xi Jinping and Joe Biden having a, important meeting, because of course there's no way that that's going to be trusted. But we're already kind of at that stage. I think the next stage where this really works is you have a standalone device which is not networked. You have an AI chip, and so that piece of kit is purely the information that's in there is purely language, and therefore it doesn't need a connection. In the same way as computers are going to have AI chips in them, so that you can do stuff locally. For that kind of level of simultaneous translation, you go on holiday, you have your little clip-on device, and it real-time translates for you, and the delay is seconds, if not a second. I think we're not, we're a year or two away from that. I think it's almost like the Babelfish in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but it's on the outside instead of in the inside. But that that feels to me like it's we're on the cusp of that very, very soon.
Nice reference. The Babelfish being a fish you put in your ear to translate everything.
Yeah. I'd like the fish
Great
more
book.
than the clip, to be honest. But I think it will probably be a clip rather than an AI fish.
Rather than an AI fish that you stick in your ear. Yeah, I mean, I think it's been like a really interesting episode. I almost feel like this is one where we should maybe schedule a revisit in 6 months to a year's time, and just kind of like just see where things have gone, because it feels like there's a lot of potential AI applications, and it also feels like AI has definitely had an impact on the industry already in terms of the speed which you talked about it earlier on, right? The amount of time it would take to go through books, whereas now presumably what you do is a lot quicker. So unless there's more translation to do, one translator can do the work of what 2 or 3 or 4 could previously, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, the thing is these days I'm using it a little bit to my advantage, because I think there will be a day that comes where using AI and using machine translation will come at a cost to the translator. Currently, the rates that I'm charging are massively affected by being technically undercut. But maybe one day that will happen. I don't know. One other thing which I forgot to touch on is the use of CAT tools, so computer assisted translation, which that's been out since probably around about 2015, 2013, something like that. So 10 years or so, where basically they were creating translation memories out of certain texts. And from that point, the program would register any translations that you input for each relevant segment, and then tell you whether it's a complete match, 100% match, fuzzy match at 70% or 50%. And then what the agencies typically used to do, well, they still do, sorry, is offer you a discounted rate depending on how much of the document matched it within itself to sort of what depending on what degree there were many matching how many matching segments there were within the document. And so that's one way that the industry has sort of discounted translators in the last 10 years or so, is by recognizing certain specific paragraphs repeating themselves and then offering a discounted rate to the translator because they're saving time. To be honest with you, I found that it hasn't always saved a lot of time. It's just added more time to, first of all, you have to learn how to use the tool. It adds that time as well. And so there are pros and cons. I suspect that once you've learned how to use it well and you get repeatedly the same sort of texts appearing, then it does save you time and you can do more translations more quickly, and it probably works out a little bit better for the translator.
Would it be right to assume, though, that you can't do this job if you don't understand and use the tool? So the people who are going to survive in the short term are the ones who are going to embrace and understand them. I mean, that's definitely what sort of my research for this episode, that's what it suggested, is that translators who are experts in the use of translation and AI tools will be the ones that stay ahead, and the ones that don't embrace it. And I don't just mean using it, but I mean keeping on top and learning how to use them to their advantage. They're the ones that in the short term are going to really suffer. Is that what you're finding? It sounds like you do use them, but do you try and keep on top of it as much as you can?
I'm in a little bit of an awkward position, because currently I'm actually looking to sort of move out of translation, if I'm being completely honest. I won't say that I've embraced it as fully as some of my colleagues have. They've got all the software. They've learned they've got all the different levels within the software. There's like for SDL Trados, I think there's like 5 different levels you can achieve of understanding, and you get qualified in them. I actually got level 1 qualification a few years back, but I haven't gone all in personally. But I could see how if you did, and if you were really specialized in a certain field, and you got repeats on the type of documents that you're used to working on, that it would probably speed things up. And the really specialized translators, as I said earlier, they can really command quite a high rate anyway. So it's debatable whether it affects them negatively. I'd say it probably helps them more than it hampers them. I'm in a little bit of a strange position where I'm a little bit more too much of a generalist to be able to make real use of the software. But yeah, I mean, going forward, I'm probably going to move out of translation anyway in the future. So it's not necessarily because of AI, but there's a part of it which, is to do with AI as well. I suspect it's going to take a little bit of a market share away in the future.
A lot of what we've talked about today sounds quite positive for the translation industry, in that there's still going to be a lot of jobs around. It's going to take a while. There's definitely certain segments that people will still be able to go into. Like, what do you think that like translators can do to prepare for some of the things that are coming around the corner? And what advice would you give to somebody who's like who wants to go into the industry, I guess?
The fact is I never actually really studied languages or Japanese specifically at university to become a translator. It's just as a consequence of enjoying the act of learning a new language that's come about. And It took a while to discover it. And I'd say that that's probably the case for most professional translators. I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire translation community, but I suspect that a lot of the people who are now professional interpreters and translators have started out just really enjoying language learning rather than seeing it as a career. So, like dentistry or medicine or whatever. I think that when you go into those different industries, you probably think, well, I'll be able to make a lot of money doing it. Medicine, law, for example. Translation, I never thought I'm going to get rich doing translation. And so back to your question about what people can do to sort of stay in the industry, like car mechanics had to retrain to basically learn how to work all the electronic components within a modern car. You have to reskill and keep abreast of all the new stuff that's coming out and learn how to use all these tools if you really want to make a long-term career out of it. I don't want to sound overly pessimistic, but there is a part of me that wonders whether a 20-year-old going to learn a language like Japanese, Chinese, Russian, or whatever is really all that likely to have a career 25 years from now. I think people of my sort of age, 40, 45, certainly 50, 55, they can expect to carry on into retirement. I'd say if you're younger, I don't know that I would necessarily recommend picking translation for a career path. Do it because you enjoy it. Do it because you like learning a new language, going to meet people from different cultures, and enjoying travel. And if you can make it a career for a while, why not?
My feeling is that, I know you've talked about there's probably not a career in it, but my feeling is that translation, you talked about meeting people, and I feel like that's something where actually, we've talked a little bit about some of the sort of legal sides of translation earlier on, but surely face-to-face translation, like the sort of things we're talking about before, like I know you don't do it for a career, but simultaneous translation, like translating where there's a very much a kind of personal interaction going on. Surely that's still a valid career. Whereas, maybe some of the things you're talking about, I think people do probably go into that as a career where they actually are aiming for that career and they do want to go into that industry for that reason. Perhaps translating documents and things like that is going to become less and less because it doesn't have that interpersonal aspect. But what do you feel about that? I mean, do you think if a robot becomes good enough at translation, we'd just do away with simultaneous translators? and just have a robot doing it?
As we touched on earlier, I think that's going to take quite a while, if it ever comes about. So I'd like to say we're always going to have people doing these sorts of jobs, but we just don't know, do we?
We
At the
flipped
moment,
this. We flipped the script here. I thought you were going to be like, I thought you
yeah,
were going to be pro translator and like
I
pro,
am.
yeah.
In a sense, I really am, and I do hope that that's the case. I'm just very aware, especially in terms of business, when it comes to money, when it comes to businesses saving money. I don't know how much the interpersonal aspect of that holds up versus the. It depends. It depends if it becomes cheaper to employ people to do interpreting than it is for AI to, for whatever reason. But also the interpersonal side of things, like you say, there may be people who just prefer the idea of having a person there, and that will always be there. So there may always be people interpreting, because there will always be people who prefer to have another person next to them doing it versus a robot or an AI.
I still feel that I'm trying to bring a positive here, and I'm known for for not necessarily always taking the positive spin on things on this podcast, but I think there are specializations, and for translators, and maybe you're right, this is not about new people entering the industry, but this is about people who are already there, about specializing, focusing where you can add value. So areas where security is a concern, you're not going to get a random translator to do your work, but you build that trust over time. You have someone who signs, a non-disclosure agreement. You build up the knowledge of a particular industry. Your translation tools might refuse to translate some really controversial things. So, specialize in terrorists and criminals, and maybe you've got a good career there because, the barriers that are put in on apps and large language models mean that they can't do that translation. So, sort of joking aside, there will be things where maybe they're too controversial for a lot of these models to allow them. And even if it's just a very, very small part that's controversial, if you've got a language model that won't allow you to get into that area, I think in those areas you maybe a new pill. So I don't feel it's necessarily I'm in the position to give career advice to people in the translation industry, but it feels like listening to you and the research I did before that, that specialization and identifying where there will still be the need for a personal interaction and why. It's not necessarily just about, oh, well, I like to have a person. Actually, there are some ways in which you might need a person for security reasons. You might need a person for reasons of confidentiality, data privacy, that you just, even though you gave the example before about how you have a paid model that says it doesn't share the data. But if I've got something really, really sensitive, I mean, I probably don't want to share it with you either, but I definitely don't want it to go into a model that I can't be 100% sure that it's not going to leak out. So, maybe there are areas that people could specialize in where there'll still be translation for longer than maybe we think.
I think you're right. And at risk of continually sounding pessimistic, which I really don't want to, the one thing which just occurred to me is that the fact that in order to have translators carry on translating and interpreting for people, you actually need them to be studying in schools and universities. And sadly, from my experience, even going back to Sheffield not 5 or 6 years ago, I saw that the Japanese language department had absolutely shrunk down to I think they'd had 25 people in the first year, and there only ended up being more than that, about 10 people graduated. So about half of the people drop out over the course of 4 or 5 years. And I asked them how many people were in the first year, and they said 5. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's because people are already aware of the fact that they don't necessarily need to learn a new language to be able to communicate with other cultures because they have their phones. It's almost like translation AI and neural machine translation is a victim of its own success, or it's causing, maybe that's not the right way to put it, but it's meaning that people are innately less inclined to feel the need to learn a new language, and therefore you're just naturally going to end up with a smaller pool of people who are able to speak these foreign languages. And therefore, the need for AI to be able to do that becomes even greater. So is that another possibility?
There's a lot of discussion out there at the moment about that I've seen about whether it's worth learning a language, and two different sides of the argument. One is no, there isn't, because like you say, you can get by, and I've seen this for years. I can speak Chinese. When I first studied Chinese, you still had books, although we did have like flashcards and stuff on apps, but you couldn't translate in the way that you can now. Now I've seen a number of people use apps to be able to get by, but to not have any understanding of, like you were saying, the nuance and the concept that I'm able to understand. But actually, do they need to, if someone's going for a week on business, as long as they can do all the bits that they need to do? So I think that's one side of the argument, is practically you don't need to. The other is kind of why you're learning languages. And we talk on previous podcasts about, in the future, in an ideal world, in a kind of the nirvana, is that you get to a point where you're not having to do everything because of the financial benefit. You're not having to learn a language just because that's a way for me to make money, and that it becomes enjoyable and as a way to understand the culture and a way of training your mind. And I think that is a fine argument, but it does come back to, most of the time when you're choosing to study, certainly at, bachelor or A-level, whatever, you're thinking of what it's going to bring to you in terms of your future earnings. And, if you're learning a language, it means you're not learning something else. I think that's the problem, is you can't, you could learn a language. I'd love to learn every language in the world, but I can't. So I have to pick one. I love Japan. Absolutely love Japan. And I actually chose to study Chinese instead of Japanese. After studying Japanese for a sort of year and a half in evenings, I chose to study Chinese because actually practically it was going to be more useful for me. So, even as someone who likes learning languages, in the end I took the practical route. And would I do the same thing now? Maybe not, seeing what's happening with language tools. So I don't know if I've just argued for something and then argued against it straight afterwards. But I guess we're all kind of trying to work our way through this at the moment. I'm not sure any of us are completely sure what our views are.
It's hard to imagine the careers advice nowadays being going to translation.
We should caveat all these podcasts, we do not take career advice from me and Jimmy on anything.
Absolutely not. But I can't, in all seriousness, with like translation seems like something where actually, there's AI and large language models in the last few years, but actually it predates that by quite a long time. We've seen like pretty good translation software and even AI-based stuff for quite a long time before the recent wave of large language models. And so I guess what you're saying is it's already having an effect on the industry, really.
DeepL's been around, I think it's 2017 they came out, or maybe it was Google. I'm now forgetting. But NMT, neural machine translation, has been around for close to 10 years, and actually it predates AI by quite a long way. And so AI is the next, the cherry on top, I suppose you could call it.
Predates the current sort of large language models. Yeah. And so I still, personally fall back to my point of learn a language because you want to learn a language, and if you can make a career out of it, because there's still translation around as an option for a career. Once you've done that, great. Why not? Perfect.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jimmy. I think that's been thought-provoking, if nothing else. In the next few weeks, we'll be starting a new kind of sub series where we look at AI and sustainability, both in terms of AI as an enabler, but also as a potential barrier to some of the climate change goals that we've got. We're also planning an episode on education. We are planning an episode where we bring someone on to help try and introduce people to some of the new tools that are out there, some advice and tips on ways to prompt and things like that. So hopefully a kind of useful, practical episode. And then we'll continue with the industry episodes and try and cover as much as we can. I think music is another thing we're going to cover. So keep listening. We will try and include any industries that people are interested in. So as we always say, drop something in the comments if you're interested. Keep following, pass it on, get others to listen. And thank you very much. We will leave, as always, with our AI and Jimmy generated Sooner song. Thanks so much, guys. Goodbye.
scared. AI is taking over the game. Translation industry, they put it at a shame. Languages flying around like planes in the air. But don't get it twisted, human touch is still rare. Every language got its own swag, its own style. The machine's trying to keep up, but it's gonna take a while. Yeah, they got the algorithms, they got the data, but when it comes to translation, we the real creators. AI bots trying to spit rhymes in every language on the earth, but they lack the soul, they lack the birth. Translating words is more than just construction. It's an art form, it's a junction.